I've attended several domestic violence conferences over the years for professional reasons, but I shall never forget one of the speakers at one of them. He argued that there must be something intrinsically wrong with males, something located in their genetics and biology, which accounts for the high incidence of violence against women in domestic relationships. He made this argument even though he was compelled to admit that some studies had shown that there was as much violence in lesbian relationships per capita as there was in heterosexual relationships. The report of those studies made it clear to me that domestic violence had less to do with anyone's biology and genetics and more to do with who holds the power and control in a relationship. Now, I haven't read these studies, but I have provided two links below in the underbar indicating that such studies exist. Conference report asks the question, who should be liberated first, women or workers? Conference report doesn't present a position on the matter. Instead, he offers the question for our consideration. Now, if I'm correct that domestic violence has to do with who holds the power and control in a relationship, then I believe that true liberation, liberation that gets at the root of social, economic, and political control, will necessarily involve liberating both women and workers. A society that believes in and instantiates the principle that individuals deserve to live in societies that maximize liberty, equality, and human well-being to the greatest extent possible will do the following. First, they will democratize the workplace as much as possible, depending, of course, upon the kind of work involved. Democratization in such a society will become a kind of zeitgeist that will naturally be extended to domestic relationships. Certainly, a society that maximizes human well-being to the greatest extent possible will not tolerate domestic violence. Such a society will equalize pay as much as possible. And if you must carve out a Rawlsian exception, we could say, except to the extent that an economic inequality can be reasonably expected to advantage everyone. We should not forget that the perpetrators of domestic violence tend to hold most, if not all, of the economic control in the domestic situation. Equalizing pay should raise the standard of living for most everyone, thus giving the victim in a domestic violence situation options for a separate life that many don't presently have under market capitalism. When we talk of liberation, we have to imagine not only changed economic, societal, and political conditions, but also a changed psychological condition, one that develops over time. We have to imagine people who eventually tend to think of themselves and others as deserving to live in societies that maximize liberty, equality, and human well-being to the greatest extent possible. People who tend to do that don't tend to perpetrate domestic violence. And the victims of domestic violence don't tend to stay in abusive relationships where the cycle of abuse can be perpetuated. So I would say that it is largely a false dilemma to question who should be liberated first, either workers or women. Rather, the approach should be both and. Thanks.